So it's very much like, well, if I only got to make one film, I'd like to just put all these things into it that I'd like to see. And I had all these floating ideas that never really had a place to put them. I had a guy with a glass eye, and he gets, wiped out, and all's left is the eye. And I had these twin sisters, and one is into psychometry and object reading and collecting all the spooky stuff. And I said, well, she'd be cool. And the guy trying to talk his way into the house saying, I've seen somebody in there. All of these things, they were all just in my my book of ideas, essentially. And it was like, well, I don't know what to do with them. And they'd been there for years, because it would be hard to stretch any of them into a feature film. And when I started writing Oddity, it was like, oh, well, there's a way you can kind of bring all these things together.
This week I'm switching it up a little bit, because I talked with writer and director of the film Oddity, which is this really cool subgenre mashup of horror, thriller elements, mystery elements, whodunit elements. It has so many of my favorite subgenres, I guess is what you would say, in it, and I think that's why I loved it so much. We saw it in theaters and it was absolutely terrifying, and then when I rewatched it before the interview at home, it was still terrifying, and I knew what was going to be happening. So there is a whole section at the beginning that's spoiler free, so if you haven't watched it yet and you just kind of want to hear a little bit about it to decide if you do want to watch it, you can listen, and then it's clearly marked when we do get into spoilers, which was a really fun conversation. It was really cool getting to talk about story with a whole other medium, where I'm not normally talking to people about visuals, and it was really cool to hear how much the visual is what drives Damian's storytelling. That being said, let's get into it. So I wanted to get to know a little bit about you before we dive into the movie. So what got you into writing, or did you always know that you wanted to write? Basically, what's your story with that?
Yeah, I guess it was just a lifelong love of story, really, of books, short stories, I guess, mainly when I was younger, and then obviously films. My parents had a VHS rental shop when I was growing up, so it was always,
Nice.
it was one of those kids always inside the shop, taking home anything good, rewatching it. This would have been in the mid '80s or early '90s.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just something I always liked. Just kind of my imagination would just. I was always just thinking up this stuff. I guess for whatever reason, it just interested me a lot. I was never very, I was never very good at school, or wasn't very athletic. So it was just, this seemed to be where my passion went into stories and just my imagination, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so cool. Well, my next question was going to be about directing or filming or picking up a camera, like where that came from too. But it sounds like maybe that was even related to your parents renting movies as well. So when did you kind of get into the film aspect of it?
It was quite late, I guess. So I went back as a mature student when I was 22 to St. John's College in Cork. I live in Cork in the southwest of Ireland. It's a film school here. And I went back at when I was 22. It's about 20 years ago now, I guess, when they opened up this course. They started teaching digital filmmaking, because digital had just come online, but it was still in that transition time between shooting on film, where it was still 16 mil and 8 mil, before YouTube and the kind of before everything went digital, and making a film was just so much more accessible for everybody. So
Right.
that was kind of my first time ever really picking up a camera, or filming anything. I was never somebody as a child that was playing with Super 8 cameras or camcorders at home or anything like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was really the beginning of it, I guess. Just made lots of bad short films that couldn't get screened at any film festivals. Lots of trial and error. Um, but I always say this to film students anyway: the best way to learn is just to do it. Just, you'll have an idea, it's really good in your head. Let's see what
Yes.
percentage of that you can get onto the camera. If I think they say if you can get 70% of the way you see it in your head onto the screen, you're doing pretty good. So for those first
Right.
short films, I was probably averaging around 10% of the way it was in my head to what it was
Yeah.
on the camera, on the screen, because it was so bad. But it's part of the process, I guess. I think it's, and it will be forever.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's always there yeah, you always have to kind of be bad at something when you start it, even if you're like intrigued by it. So you kind of have to get through those like messy first trials of doing something.
Yeah.
But that is something I kind of wanted to talk about too, because this is obviously I normally talk to authors of books.
Hmm.
And it's obviously very different writing a book versus like a screenplay for film,
Hmm.
especially because of what you were just talking about. Like it's like when you write it, if you're writing a book, you can just kind of write whatever,
Hmm.
and like that's the visual that you're thinking of. But there is so much more to translate when you're having to then turn it into like an actual film that's representing your ideas.
Hmm.
So have you said you kind of wrote short stories too. What is like the differing experience for you in like turning something into a film versus just like maybe writing a short story?
I guess if, I always say if I was a better writer, if I had more talent, or maybe just better educated, I would have been a novelist. Because I think in some ways it'd be easier because you can just write in that
Yes.
bubble, and it's anything and anything you want. You can
Yeah.
get into the character's thoughts. And
The budget doesn't, you don't have to think about budget as much at all.
it doesn't matter. So very much when you're writing a screenplay, especially when you're starting out, you have to figure out, well, how do I do this? If you don't have any kind of financing or resources
Hmm.
or anything, you're going like, well, if I don't know how to do this, we won't be able to do it. So I'd made a lot of short films, and they were always written around everything that I had access to, or some, even an interesting person or an interesting prop or a place, um, because I knew I'd be able to do that. And then I made
Yeah.
one feature film called Caveat, and it was very much again written around everything I had access to, or I know somebody that could beg, borrow, or steal something that I needed from. Um, and I still think that's always there. Even I'm working on my new film now, and it's you're still trying to write within certain limitations. I think it's good though. I think it's good um, to have those limitations because it makes you be more creative and still trying to figure out how to do it, and that helps obviously when you're trying to figure out how to film it. And Oddity was very much the same. Oddity was written around an interesting location that I had access to, and I knew it would be one location, and just trying to tell a story within that space. But if you're a writer, of course, you can just go nuts,
Yeah.
write whatever you want, and if people want to adapt it for a film, it'll become their problem.
That's
Yeah,
true. That was going to be another one of my questions too, is so it's, well, that's a whole other thing. There's a lot of genres blended together in this movie, but the location is super, like it adds to the like gothic kind of eerie vibes that are going with it.
Hmm.
And I thought that the house that you filmed in it was just so cool. Like I was like, I want to go to this place. So I was gonna ask if you had like that visual in mind, and then you found the place, or if you had a place and kind of wrote around it. So it sounds like you knew a place you could use.
Yeah, well, it's my friends that own Bantry House in West Cork, and that's an old renovated stables at the back of the house. And I shot my film Caveat there, but we had built sets in that room. Um,
Wow.
and I just thought the room was cool, with the walkway and the stone walls and all this kind of thing. And I just said, well, if you set I had this idea for the haunted house film, which was Oddity, and I said, well, if you set it in this room as opposed to just your standard, spooky old house, there's something really
Mm-hmm.
just an odd feeling in that room.
Yeah.
It's claustrophobic, but it's at the same time you can shoot it quite wide, and you get these
Yeah.
great angles. So yeah, there definitely was a point I think when if we couldn't have gotten permission to film, I just wouldn't have made the film. I would have moved on to something else, just
Wow.
because I thought the location was so important. But yeah, again, it's like coming back to what you said about the difference between writing a book and a script is you're still trying to write around something that you can already visualize, and it already exists. And that was definitely the case
Yeah.
with Oddity. Yeah.
That's really cool. Is my husband and my husband's a photographer and videographer, and then I edit mostly social media content. But that's something that he's run into when he goes to just like do a fun project or a passion project. Sometimes not having any constraints makes it harder for him to be creative. So
Yeah.
we've also kind of had conversations about that, how there sometimes having the constraints or a structure that you have to follow actually helps you
Hmm.
be more creative. So that is kind of fascinating, thinking about like just the inspiration point can be so different, but it still can inspire something really cool.
Yeah, I think those limitations are great. Even yeah, I've heard directors talk about that sandbox that they're given to play in, and then they know that like, okay,
Yeah.
I have my four walls. Everything inside here now is what I can do. Whereas if you can kind of do anything, sometimes
Hmm.
it's not the best. And you could not to you could point out certain filmmakers, I guess, and look at their earlier films where they had less access to budgets and special
Hmm.
effects and stuff like this, and some of that stuff was very creative. And then maybe look at films they made later, which are very big and maybe not as, I guess, just in my opinion anyway, maybe not as interesting as some of the earlier stuff they made, where they had to be a little bit more creative at what they were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really cool point. The other thing that I brought up a little bit earlier is that it's like there's kind of this genre matchup. So we have paranormal elements, there's a horror element, we have a psychic twin who's kind of our whodunit detective, but we're kind of using the paranormal as the way that she solves it. There's home invasion, there's horror. I can't remember if I said horror already. Did you go into the story knowing you wanted to blend all of those together, or was like the story you wrote, it just happened to be all of those?
Um, it's probably a really pessimistic answer, but I think I've said it before that like I always worry that it'll be when we made Oddity, I said like this might be the last film I get to make. You just never know because because I think films are just Caveat was such a difficult film to make that I wasn't sure if I wanted to make more, and I said okay, like let's see how Oddity turns out. So it's very much like, well, if I only got to make one film, I'd like to just put all these things into it that I'd like to see, and I had all these floating ideas that never really had a place to put them. I had a guy with a glass eye and he gets wiped out and all's left is the eye, and I had these twin sisters, and one is into psychometry and object reading and collecting all the spooky stuff, and I said, well, she'd be cool, and it kind of went on like that. It was just I had just all these the guy trying to talk his way into the house saying I've seen somebody in there. All of these things, they were all just in my my book of ideas essentially, and it was like, well, I don't know what to do with them, and they'd been there for years because it was be hard to stretch any of them into a feature film. And when I started writing Oddity, it was like, oh well, there's a way you can kind of bring all these things together, and I was never really sure if it would work because it does bounce across a few genres of subgenres
Mm-hmm.
of horror. Like as you say, it's a home invasion, it's a bit of a psychological horror, supernatural horror, it's a little bit of a mystery. And just trying to get all those to work. That was kind of the challenge with the script. But weirdly,
Yeah.
they seem to, in my head anyway, it seemed to be like, well, these all things all seem like they could work together in a film, but I wasn't sure if the film would work. But I guess that's what you've got to try to, you try to take that chance when you do it. Yeah, so it was really just all these old ideas I had and trying to bring them together into this thing that I really wanted to see. And I think as
Yeah.
well that just because there's such a mishmash of horrors, and it can work, it can work sometimes. And thankfully, people seem to like Oddity. They think that these things doesn't really, nobody really seems to get thrown out by a sudden change in whatever the threat in the film is. But I'll
Hmm.
find, like if I'm watching something with my girlfriend, that she'll be like, she won't be scared of anything supernatural, just anything ghosts. It just won't scare. But it's more that like a kind of a thriller, or that
Hmm.
she might find something like The Orphan or Silence the Lambs much scarier than,
Yeah.
I don't know, maybe Ringu or something like this,
Hmm.
which I always find quite interesting. So I guess one of the things from a horror film, from a horror filmmaker point of view, try to say, well, yeah, there's ghosts in it, but if you're not afraid of ghosts, then maybe the guy trying to talk his way into the house is something to be afraid of.
Right.
If that doesn't catch you, then maybe it's the psychological threat or whatever.
Yeah.
It kind of hopes that there'll be something in here that'll catch out everybody at least once.
Yeah.
Kind of a little bit of the challenge with it.
Right.
Hmm.
I that makes a lot of sense. I love that perspective because this summer there was a lot of discourse around like what scary means. So I got like that was really fascinating to me because like you're pointing out it's so subjective
Yeah,
because like you said like some people are never going to be scared by a ghost and for some people that is the most terrifying thing to think about.
yeah.
And there was and I enjoyed Long Legs, but that was where that came out. That was where I was starting to see all this discourse about, like, they were saying like, oh, this is the scariest movie that's been made in 10 years. And like
Hmm.
all the like footage of I can't think of it, Micah's heart rate like going up really high when she saw Nicolas Cage. And I enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it as a movie, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was terrifying for me. But then my friend watched it and he was like, why didn't you tell me that this was terrifying? And I was like, well, I didn't say, it just wasn't as terrifying for me. So then we heard about Oddity on TikTok actually. And someone was saying like that Longlegs didn't necessarily terrify me, but this one did.
Hmm.
And so we were like, okay, let's go see it. And like on our way there, we were talking about like what, like, I haven't like been totally terrified in a theater in a little while. It's just kind of like what we were talking about on the way there. And I was like, it's so hard to know what's going to get you. But there was a scene in this one that we'll get to after we're into spoilers, that we were sitting there and my husband turned to me and he was like, this is terrifying. And I was like, yes, it is.
Right.
So there are a lot of elements at play. And I do think it's kind of cool that scary is different for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't read a whole lot about Oddity online. I just try not to.
Right.
For the most part, it seems to be quite good. But I see that, I read about other horror films, obviously, just as a fan.
Uh-huh.
But I think scariest film of the year has been attached to pretty much every horror film that seems to have come out this summer. It's there.
Right.
I really enjoyed Long Legs. I thought it was, because I'd seen Long
Yeah.
Legs for some reason just seemed to get lumped in with Oddity. There's such different films, but I seem to
Very.
come across the two of them just being, I don't know, were they released close together, or maybe that's scary.
It was here. They were released within 2 weeks of
Okay.
each other, I think.
Right.
So I think that's kind of why.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, but I thought they were very different. But I thought Long Legs was great.
Yes.
And Oz Perkins is such
Yeah.
a good director in it, but it's a very different film, and just I found it very
Yes.
unsettling. But I know horror is so subjective. I mean, you could watch one thing and go like,
Right.
and find it scary at all, and the next person found it
Yeah.
terrifying. I've seen a bit of this with Skinamarink. Did you see Skinamarink?
No, I haven't seen, but I heard people talking about it this summer
Yeah.
too.
Such an unusual film, and it's on Shudder, and it's like it's a low budget film. I think it was made during the pandemic, and
Okay.
it's a slow movie, and
Hmm.
but just very interesting. And I found watching it, I was going, yeah, it's quite slow, and it's it feels very very creative the way it was made. But that really got under my skin when it was finished for whatever reason. It was kind of,
Right.
I was here on my own at the time, kind of going to bed, afterwards, going like, whoa, that film is kind of. It's been a while since I've been
Yes.
scared by something. That seems to have kind of gotten in there for some reason. So but I
Yes.
couldn't tell you why. It's not like the end of Ringu or something where you can really
Yeah.
put your finger on. Well, this is terrifying because of this reason. But
Yes.
that movie, whatever it was, it just seemed to or like Under the Skin was another film that when you finish, you go, oh, I feel really unsettled after watching that. So there's
Yeah.
no,
Yeah, I think unsettled is a good word for it too, because that's kind of how I felt about Long Legs. Like there's just kind of like dread throughout all of it.
Mm.
And you're just kind of tense, even though there's not these like huge jump scares super often. But
Yeah.
unsettling, I think, is like that really good word too, where the whole time you're like, where is this headed? What does
Yeah.
this mean?
Yeah, it's really good.
Yeah.
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 There's something off about the whole feeling in the movie, which is great.
Yeah, and the shots were, it was like really beautiful to watch, was like the other part that I felt like. Which I kind of noticed because I rewatched Oddity this morning, actually. This is still kind of morning for me over here. But some of the shots were also, like, the color grading's very different. I think Oddity's a little more like green blue-ish, but there were some of the like really squared off shots that were reminding me of some of the ones in Long Legs too. So just there in my brain space together.
All right.
It sounds like, so you were kind of mentioning that the like objects were kind of the things in your mind, and then you also knew you had that house that you could shoot in.
Yeah.
Was there anything plot wise that was like the inspiration for this one, or was it mostly kind of like those visuals that came to you first?
It's usually the visuals, and then just trying to wrap these just wrap these floating ideas I had for scenes around this main story of the two sisters and one of them getting killed. Yeah, that's pretty much the idea, and then just kind of built out from there. Then you start bringing in the other characters and working out your plot, I guess.
Yeah, that's like one of the most fascinating things to me with this getting to talk to writers is how many different ways inspiration can come to you. And so some people it's like the character was the first thing or vibes were the first thing, and they
Yeah.
don't even get to plot until later. And I feel like it makes a lot of sense that with movies that could be even more common, that you just have a really strong visual in your mind and then you kind of work around that.
Yeah, I think I've said this before. They always liked this old interview with Guillermo del Toro. He talks about he would just start with some image, whatever it would be, and he just that would be he can see the film from that and start building out from that. And I do think
Yeah.
with Oddity, it became like that tent that she set up. Like it just, I think it was like, oh, that would
Yes.
be a cool poster kind of thing, like on that. Just imagine this yellow tint in this big empty room. It's like she's camping out here as she's doing the place up, and then the
Yes.
haunted desk bell and all these kind of things. They start to, you
Hmm.
start going through your old ideas and go, oh yeah, well a lot of this makes sense. I could bring all these together now, and I find that
Yeah.
anyway. You find a lot of old ideas that have been sitting there for a long time. They just start, you never know what to do with them, and suddenly it's like this is exactly how I should end in this script. So
Yeah.
yeah,
That's so cool. I did have a question about the yellow tint. So actually, we're gonna get into spoilers now. So if you haven't watched it, go watch it and then come back basically. I feel like we've probably intrigued you enough. And also, I love revenge stories. So, and I know a lot of the listeners do. So I forgot to mention it's also relatively revenge driven. So,
yeah.
I'm sure we've piqued your interest at this point. So if you haven't seen it, go watch it. Um I had a couple. I have a bunch of spoilery questions, but since we just came from the tent, it stuck out to me too because even when I was trying to describe this, like we saw it in theaters probably 5 or 6 weeks ago at this point, which is why I wanted to rewatch it and kind of refresh it in my brain because I couldn't take all the notes I wanted to in the movie theater. But the tent stood out to me so much, even when I was describing this to one of my friends recently, and I hadn't rewatched it yet. And then when I was rewatching it, there's like when the man comes to her door to warn her at the very beginning, it's also like very prominently right behind her, and it is like glowing yellow.
Yeah.
And then you see it later as we find out more about the story, and it was like glowing yellow too. Was there anything behind that imagery, or and the color choices and stuff, or was it just like that idea kind of just stood out to you as an image?
I think it's just that's her point of safety. I guess just from that kind
Yeah.
of, my feeling of it would be like that's the one place that's not as cold and dark as the rest of the house. The idea
Mm.
was that it would always affect the lighting. That this would be almost like our, what's I guess what would you say what's motivating all the lighting in the house. The idea was always to have it feel like it is an old ghost story. That it's supposed to feel like it's lamplit and kind of those
Mm.
warm tones of orange and yellow. Against all this dark shadow. I just thought it would just look visually interesting, and because it's so
Mm-hmm.
prominent in those scenes, just because the film is non-linear, that every time we cut back, you know that you're back there very quickly. That it has
That's a good
that
point.
that feeling between these two people because the lighting is so so quickly recognizable. I guess was the idea
Hmm.
behind it. Um,
Yeah.
Obviously, for the murder scene, I knew they never wanted to show it. It was always the idea to just to skip past it. Um,
Yeah.
Never really just I mean the film is a little bit silly in some ways. I don't think it takes itself too seriously. There is comedy in it, and I just thought if you had
Yeah.
quite a violent moment in the middle of it, I thought it would have maybe made it a little bit less rewatchable, or there would have been something about it that would have taken people out of it. It's still hopefully shocking, but I just don't know
Hmm.
why I would show it. It just didn't feel like it belonged to the story. So even I think even in the script and certainly in storyboarding it was just let's just skip past it. But that shock of from a perfectly clean yellow bright tint suddenly just being
Yes.
destroyed with blood,
Hmm.
with a locked off camera. I just thought that there would be something but again there was something kind of shocking about that.
Yeah.
Hmm.
There are quite a few things that actually happen off camera too, which I thought was really intriguing. And I feel like it like really adds up the suspense and the horror in certain moments. So like you're saying, we have this moment where she realizes someone's in the house, which I have another question about that. And then she unzips the tent, and then, like you're saying, we just cut, and now there's blood everywhere. So we like understand that she died, but we didn't see it. There's also the the stuff that's in the wooden man's head. Like we
Hmm.
find out that there's stuff in there,
Yeah.
but we don't see her put it in there, so we kind of don't know what it is, but it's like alluding to something kind of witchy and magical. So how did you pick the things you wanted off screen versus on screen?
Um, I suppose it's that okay. You could take, we'll say, the objects in the head, for example. It's like, well, she's had a week since she's discovered. She's had a week to prepare for this revenge and get the wooden man ready. I just like to
Yeah.
think that whatever she's had to do at home, whatever kind of ritual, incantations, whatever this whole thing is that she's, I guess, whatever this whole ceremony that she's done at home to get this guy, up and running eventually, that it's just completely left open to the audience's imagination. I mean, you could have showed you could have showed her in the room, and there's candles everywhere, and she's reciting
Mhm.
stuff, and she's placing the objects in one by one. I think it's just weirder to show it from almost Yana's point of view. I mean, Yana's so kind of set in the real world, I guess, that she's like, what is, she says like, what is all this?
Yeah.
It's kind of the idea. I just thought it'd be more interesting that the audience would have to go, oh, clearly this is how it works. This is something
Yeah.
that she's done off screen in the last week. Um, and I guess the other stuff that you're just not showing is again, or that happens off screen, is just add to the mystery, I suppose. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. Um, so from the beginning, the something I thought that's really cool is it kind of flips the trope on its head that like the weird looking guy was actually trying to help her.
Hmm.
Was that intentional? Because it felt like such a flip to me. Like we always think like, oh, the weird looking person is probably the person who did it. Was that intentional, or was it just kind of like the visual you had?
I guess it's the visual. I suppose it's playing with horror tropes a little bit. That I think.
Mhm.
I mean, Carolyn Bracken's playing two roles in it. That she's playing both sisters, but then I kind of feel in some ways that everybody is everybody's playing two parts one way. I mean, like Tig Murphy, who's is our Olin trying to talk his way into the house. I mean, he did quite a difficult job because he's trying to play. He's a very skilled actor to do that because you're trying to play like both menacing and like there's no way I'd let this guy into the house, but also something kind of vulnerable about him and sincere and at the same time non-threatening. It's like, okay, I will let this guy in because he is trying to, he's trying to help me. So I mean, and then of course Ted is both playing this concerned, grieving widower, and then obviously a sociopath,
Yeah.
killer as well. So, and on and on. They all seem to kind of have this double side to them, I guess.
Yeah. The other part of that, just kind of an extension of that, is you're kind of thinking this whole time that it's like the crazy or mentally unwell people. Like you're
Yeah.
thinking like, oh, this has to be the cause of something so violent. And then like you're saying, what we actually learn is the very like normal looking guy who like works to quote unquote help people with mental health issues is the one who is actually the most evil. And I mean, Ivan actually kills her, but I, I think I think it'd be safe to say he was at least a little bit manipulated
Oh,
by Ted as well. So was that part intentional, or did that just kind of come through with the idea of having like duplicitous characters?
I think so. Yeah. I suppose it'd be quite obvious if it's like I'm a big fan of B movies in the '80s. Or just stories in
Uh-huh.
general. The escaped mental patient is roaming the woods, killing people, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's just to flip that, really, to say like that this guy obviously did have trauma or whatever in his past, but
Mhm.
he's still showing up. He's doing the right thing. It's the doctor
Yeah.
that's the villain. Um,
Yeah.
it's again, it's just playing with tropes a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah. So there's also like a really huge focus on eyes, sight, blindness. It like really feels like a motif throughout it. So we have Darcy is blind. I noticed like Ivan's mask when he's there to kill her, the like eye slots almost look like bullet holes
Yeah.
was the best thing that I could think of when I was looking at it. And then there's even when Darcy is talking to Yana,
Hmm.
she about Olin, she says something along the lines of like, if I only had one working eye, I would kill to protect it too.
Hmm.
So what was your idea behind all the stuff with eyes and sight in this one?
That's a funny one because I sometimes think when you're writing this stuff or when you're making it, it's there on some level, but it's never super intentional. It's not like, okay, there's going to be this,
Mm,
recurring motif of whatever it's going to be in the film, and it's not until afterwards when you watch it you go, oh yeah, this is clearly
yeah.
there. It's very obvious. It was the same with Caveat. People were saying that there's a continuous like circles. There's circles and holes
Mm,
everywhere in the film, and it's like, what's the idea then? It's like, you don't, I wish I had a better answer.
it's so
Um,
cool. It just
I mean,
happens.
I've seen interviews with Danny Boyle talking about that when he finishes films or when even when he's making films, sometimes he doesn't know what it's about, doesn't know what the theme of the film is, but it's like when he finishes, he watches it, and even like after a little bit of time passes, you can kind of go, oh yeah, this is what I was doing. This is what it was about.
Yeah.
So there might be a little bit of that. Maybe sometimes who knows where these things come from. It's such a terrible answer.
Right.
I wish I had some great answer.
No,
Like
it's interesting to me too, no matter what. Like I've had people say that where it's like I didn't notice until after I wrote it. And that just seems even more magical to me almost that it was just there. So I don't think it's a bad answer. It's cool that
okay,
it just showed up. Yeah.
you know,
um
nice if you could say everything in the film was so carefully constructed and
uh-huh.
and completely intentional. But I guess it's like any other art. These things
Yeah.
just find their way in, and who knows where they came from.
Yeah.
Hmm.
I think that is it's a good reminder. I'm writing something. I'm getting there. But every time someone has an answer like that, it's a good reminder to me that like it doesn't all have to be so rigidly planned because I'm like that in a lot of other areas of my life. So I think it's cool to hear that for some people, some of it is just like the process of creating. It's not that you have to like overthink everything to like
Oh yeah.
make something that has stuff in it that pops up.
And I think if there's no answers to these things, it means that in some ways it might make the story, you can come back to it again and go like, well,
Mm,
I don't know what that means. I need to
yeah.
figure that out. So I'm like that if it with a book or a film. If it's like I don't really get it. I really like when I finish a film and I'm unsure of how I felt about it. It's like I like to think
Yeah.
I liked it, but something about it I got to go back and watch it again. There's been so many films like that. Where I'm going, okay, I've got to take
Yeah.
another look at this because I didn't fully get it, but I know I like it. And you start to slowly uncover things or notice things that you hadn't in the first viewing.
Yeah. That was actually my experience then rewatching it, which is uh I mean, I've had that experience with other films as well, but it's like the first time you're watching it, you really are experiencing it and trying to just like follow, especially with thrillers or horror that have like twists, which is a lot of what I read and watch. You're also just trying to like kind of figure it out while you're watching it. And then the second time, because I kind of like knew what it was, and then I was thinking more about like questions for it, it was also different experiencing it that way
Hmm.
as well. So it's like even as an experience of a movie, sometimes the second time you watch, you like catch more of those things
Yeah,
too.
yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Yeah. So we've mentioned the death scene a little bit, but basically, one, I think the reveal was so terrifying to me. So hopefully if you're listening at this point, you have seen it already. But the fact that she realizes like from looking at the camera, like that the continuous pictures that were being taken, that reveal, that was when my husband turned to me and was like, I am terrified right now. And I was like, yes, it's so creepy to think. I think it's because home invasion feels so
Hmm.
invasive for lack of a better word because you're like you think you're somewhere safe
Yeah.
and someone could be in there with you.
Hmm.
And it was from our conversation about what is scary. I haven't seen anything recently that sticks in my head in terms of like when I was younger I would have like more nightmares if I watched something like that.
Hmm.
And we'd seen the movie like 4 weeks prior and my husband was gone for a week for work. And I woke up in the middle of the night because my dog was just standing at our door barking into the hallway and was just like barking like there was something out there.
Huh.
I hadn't thought of the movie in like a month, and all of a sudden it was that image that was like in my mind, was like him in the mask, and I had to like sleep with my lights on for the rest of the night because I was like, oh my gosh, this is just like stuck in my head now.
That's brilliant.
So
I love to hear that. That's fantastic.
yes, yes. That's what I've been telling people. I'm like, that visual, like it is crazy the way certain visuals stick with us,
Yeah.
even when we know they're fake,
Oh yeah.
even when it was like weeks before. But all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, what if there's a guy, like I couldn't turn away from the door because I was like, what if there's someone standing over me and I don't know? So a couple questions from that, I guess. The review with the camera, I thought was so creative. Like, what was the moment like thinking of that? And then also just like the scene of then like you see him out and then you see him out there and then she's dead already. Like, how did that all come together?
It's just to build that suspense because you've been through such a long conversation with Tig and Carolyn, and he's trying to talk his way in. And then when she's left on her own, then you kind of know, okay, here we go. Now this is where your suspense starts. And maybe very easy just to have like a jump scare. Just she goes, okay, I didn't believe him, and then she's gets into the tent, and he could have been inside the tent, or he could have been just,
Yeah.
you could have heard a noise outside the tent, and it opened up the thing slowly. It just felt like you just had to plant it that no, she is in trouble, and Tig's character Olin was telling the truth. There is somebody in the house, and it's just a thing that like, okay, now it's just a matter of time. We know that she's in big trouble. The guy is somewhere, and it's just finding ways in to go like, how do you really drag this out and really build that suspense up until you finally reveal it? Because it's very easy just to do a jump scare and it's there, but it's just trying to get that
Yes.
building that suspense is always where all the work and this the storyboarding and then the performance
Yeah.
way Cullum and the lads shot it, and and then obviously with Brian the editor and Asa Hand the sound designer, all of those things, you have to give all of them loads to work with, as opposed to just here's one shot where it's a jump scare. If you
Yes.
completely build that up, and just for Carolyn as well, it's just great that you can kind of get herself into that, work herself up to the point that she does in the film when he finally revealed. So the idea of the camera was just to give myself, is just to really, put that foundation under us to say like, she's in really big trouble now because this guy is in the house somewhere. So from the point
Yeah.
where you know this to the point where it's revealed, that then is where, where it takes, essentially everybody working on the film to get that, to get that scare right.
Mhm.
Whereas if you just
Yeah.
didn't have that, it's like, okay, But I
Yeah.
guess it's like anything. It's like any kind of a slasher movie, and I guess that is really the slasher element part of the film.
Mhm.
It's like you need to know that the killer is here somewhere, but it's like the
Mhm.
whole suspense is in, well, where is he and when is he going to attack? So
Yes.
that was kind of the idea.
Yeah, I obviously rewatched it. I obviously knew what was gonna happen. I turned the volume down because I was like watching it. My husband was still sleeping upstairs. I was like, I know this is gonna be loud, and it still made me jump. Like it's terrifying to think of. Um, so the wooden man is another like fixture object in the movie as well, and I read somewhere it's related to some Jewish folklore possibly. So how did that come together?
But yeah, I guess it's the idea that the golem that that was made of clay that would come to life, from whatever they needed it to do. But from a horror point of view, it was very much that the idea, I think, originally was that she was going to show up with a doll, like a kind of
Mm,
your kind of Annabelle, Chucky kind of small doll, but it's just been done to death, and done perfectly. I think
right.
those films have covered it really well. I just thought it'd be a lot funnier if you showed up with something just really, really big and awkward, as just sitting at the table to the point of borderline comedy, where it's like, is this thing ever going
Yeah.
to do anything? Because it's almost kind of loses its scare after a while, and it has been very rewarding to watch it in, to see it in festivals, or going to the cinema to see it
Hmm.
with friends, to see people react to when Caroline and Carolyn are having their are sitting down at the table, and you cut to that shot of it's just sitting there with them, and no one's really
Yes.
that freaked out by it. Even just the kind of ridiculousness of that situation has always gotten a laugh, or maybe a little bit of a nervous laughter, because
Hmm.
obviously it's a little bit of a ticking bomb. It's only a matter of time before it it will do something
Yeah.
because it is a horror film. So it was just really
Hmm.
kind of that idea. It was like going, well, if this thing's going to sit there for the whole film and become almost like this center horror piece with all this other stuff happening around it, and the flashbacks and the mystery unfolding and all of the horror of the home invasion and all this, and ghosts thing, but this thing's still just going to be there. Um,
Hmm.
I don't know. I think even on set, I was saying that this will be really funny. This will be funny if it's just there. And I guess I've
Yeah.
been scary, but it kind of, there's that, horror
Yeah.
comedy anywhere are so close. We did shoot
Yeah.
stuff where we would, turn its head left and right.
Hmm.
It's always looking forward, but we would, get a take where we had it looking at Carolyn, or she's walked away and now it's looking behind, and we just ended
Uh-huh.
up cutting all that stuff out of it because it was like, no, it just it feels worse when it's not doing anything, weirdly.
Right.
The more it's doing it, it should be creepier, but
Uh-huh.
strangely enough, it just seemed to fall a little bit flatter when we'd watch it, and he's moving his head or he's doing little things. It's like, no,
Hmm.
it's better to just, you just gotta wait for it
Yeah.
to finally do something. Bar that one
Yeah.
time he looks up, and I think we get a little.
That's what I was going to ask about when she looks over and
Yeah,
drops her phone.
I think because that's the only time we had a move, it just gets a much bigger reaction. Whereas
Yes.
done other little bits and pieces, it'd be like you've kind of diluted that one then a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that
Yeah. And go
sorry.
ahead. Oh, you're fine. I was just going to say, it is like the fact that it's not moving or doing anything too is why you also kind of like forget about it for a
Yeah,
little bit.
yeah,
And so then that's why like you just haven't seen it a little bit, and then she like peers over the edge, and for whatever reason that's even like this jump scare that it's staring back at her,
yeah,
even though it's been down there, you're just
yeah.
like not seeing it. So then like the few times you do, you're like, okay, that's unsettling. Yeah. So also Darcy eventually realizes that she killed Olin and that he was actually innocent.
Yeah.
And she says a line about how she's gonna have to pay for that.
Hmm.
Was that supposed to be foreshadowing that to her death? Was like some of why she died? Was that supposed to be connected to her paying for that death, or was that just kind of coincidental that she says that and then she dies
I,
shortly
I
after?
think we talked about the line, myself and Carolyn, and it was like, well, she's going to pay for it somehow. She's going to pay for it, um, legally here. She's going to be arrested, whatever it's going to be, or else in the afterlife. If if
Mhm.
I'm sure she believes in hell, or she believes in some kind of punishment that is going to catch up with her there. Um, yeah, whatever it is, whatever it is behind the line, I think it just means that it's going to come back. It's going to come back and get her, which I guess it does, isn't it? Because she doesn't survive the film. So
Yeah,
mm,
yeah.
yeah,
She does not.
yeah,
Which kind of ties into like at the moment that we think we're going to have this huge revenge payoff. Like the wooden man basically she falls because Ted, yeah,
yeah,
opens the trap door,
mm,
and obviously she's blind or whatever that is, like a space in the floor.
yeah,
And she falls because she didn't know that happened. So she's basically laying on the ground, like bleeding profusely out of her head and like barely alive.
mm,
And that's when she's able to summon the wooden man. And also Ivan has been sent back there. So he's there. And so the wooden man is going after him, gets him in a headlock. I'm assuming that's also because it looks like that's how Olin died. Like his head
yeah,
got literally smashed
mm,
to pieces. She's about to do that, and then she looks up and she sees her sister
mm,
through that kind of trap door. And then I think that's the final image we see there, because then we jump to Ivan in a hospital room. So
yeah.
obviously he survived. So what was the decision to not have him die? And is it anything, because I was trying to think through it as I was watching it, is anything related to like seeing her sister and then just wanting to be with her sister? Was that kind of what was implied, or why did you go with that choice?
Let me see. So I guess it would be. As, you sometimes wonder if if the character's going to lose sympathy,
Mm,
if they get very violent, or if they do something that's like, oof, this is quite full on.
yeah.
And I think if she had killed him, I don't know. it would weirdly feel kind of anticlimactic. It's definitely one of the scenes in the film when I watch it. Um, I think I've watched it now for the last time. I don't think it's going to be a very long time before I watch the film again. But
Yeah.
it's definitely one of those scenes in the film where I mean, it's like everything you shoot, you'd love to do it again, and it's one that I definitely still pick at, or I go, there's stuff that I can kind of,
Mm.
again. It's the one I can see now how a million different things I would have done. It's fine, it works grand,
Yeah.
but I think with it was still the idea that she doesn't go through with it fully. One, because it's
Hmm.
pretty much taking her last breath and she dies.
Right.
But I think just when I try to come back to what I was thinking of when I wrote it, it just felt like that if she'd gone through it and she'd like burst his head and done
Uh-huh.
this, it's like it feels again a step too far. Something about it, even though he deserves it, but
Yes.
it still worry about the audience losing.
Mm.
That you're going to lose the audience right at the end. Whereas if she
Yeah.
just died and then decided to let this go, and
Hmm.
knowing I guess whatever punishment is going to catch up with Ivan anyway, that she would just
Hmm.
let that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think there was some thinking like that behind it,
Hmm.
just to
Yeah, because we
not go
do.
through with it.
Yeah, we do see that then like Ted basically commits Ivan and is calling him crazy
Yeah.
because of course how many people are gonna
Mm.
believe that a wooden man is the reason that he got beaten up. So it also that was the other thing I was wondering as I then watched the rest of it. I was like, it also gives a chance to even show how terrible Ted is and like his
Yeah.
abuse of power. Like I have a note that was like abuse of power obvi. And I was like, okay, that's
Mhm.
that's definitely there. So we kind of get that continuation with his character too,
Well,
that
that's true. Yeah. And there
that
could
that's happening.
absolutely. I mean, it could have been something like that too. It could have been even in terms of writing. It's like, well, if you kill him now, then you're pretty much just who's Ted talking to now? Is he monologuing to the mirror? Like it's just going to be,
Right.
um, it's just going to. We don't get any sense of what. We never see that
Yeah.
mask slipped in fully. We never really get a good idea of
Yeah.
how detached or dangerous this guy is, I guess. And I think you can kind of
Mhm.
see a lot of that when he's talking to when he has Ivan strapped down at the end and he's going to feed him to this to
Oh
this
my
guy
god.
down the hall, like so.
Somehow I forgot about that part, like the he must be a cannibal is released on him. So I was like, it's obviously like the very last scene, and I was like taking notes. I was like, okay, my dog's like clearly about to want to go for his morning walk. So I'm like, okay, we're near the end, and then all of a so when his face does appear, I jumped then too. I was like, I totally forgot about that part, and something about him like starting with eating his toe is
Yeah.
just like I'm not gonna have my feet out from under my covers for a few nights. um, but with Ted, then that final scene that we do get
Yeah.
is so cool. The haunted bell we were talking about earlier gets delivered to him.
Yeah.
And this is obviously after she died, but at the beginning of the movie, when he walks into her shop,
Hmm.
she even says something along the lines to him. She's like, ring the bell and see what happens, and he kind of smirks because he doesn't believe in
Yeah.
it, and it's like it helps us become very aware from the beginning that he doesn't believe in all of this
Yeah.
stuff that Darcy, her abilities and stuff. And so at the end he does ring, and you get like multiple shots of him like looking around and kind of again being kind of smug and being like, ha, there's nothing here. And then that final image of the movie is that there is the bellboy, this ghost of him like standing right next to him. So one, I guess it could be interpreted either way, like maybe the ghost kills him or maybe it doesn't. But if we're interpreting it that he did finally kind of get his comeuppance, was that a through line that you were planning from the beginning, that his like hubris would eventually be his downfall?
Absolutely, because he doesn't experience anything supernatural in the whole film. He's constantly being told by everybody around him, even Ivan saying, "I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to hell." He's constantly told these things that he's almost irritated to listen to this stuff. He just really
Yes.
won't entertain it. And I think that sending this haunted decibel was very much like a plan B for Darcy. It was like, okay, well, if I fail,
Mm-hmm.
I'm still going to have this, ready to go in the post to take him out. And I guess you kind of
Mm-hmm.
just said that, like, with his own arrogance and,
Yeah.
wouldn't be able to resist, um, ringing this bell and just proving her wrong, even though she's gone.
Yeah.
And, that was always the idea because I really like stories or films, and I know I'm onto something good when I'm watching a film, and you're into that, you're definitely into the third act, and it looks like it's all wrapped up, and I love to find myself saying, Where's this going now?" It's like
Yeah.
everybody's dead, or there's no way to catch the guy, and or it's going to be some stupid fake out where somebody we
Hmm.
thought was dead, but then they come back. I love that. I love when you know writers will put you in that spot at the end where you go like, "Wow, it feels like we're
Yeah.
wrapped up, but we're still in this."
Hmm.
And that was always the idea with this. It was like even burn the wooden man, like burn the wooden
Yeah.
man, kill everybody. The villain is completely alone. It's like, but,
Hmm.
but now what do we do? And that was always the idea of planting that desk bell very early. And there's a very specific line in it where she says, "Well, the last two people to ring it were found dead," and he's
Yes.
yeah, sure. So it was just to plant that you're even telling the audience if he rings this, he is going to die. You're not going to show it, but like
Uh-huh.
that he's that he is doomed as soon as he rings it. So that
Hmm.
was really the idea with it, even from the script phase. In terms of shooting it, like it was, I had made a short film years ago called "He Dies at the End" in
Hmm.
2008, and it was like it was the first thing I'd ever made that worked. I'd made lots of terrible short films. I couldn't get them into festivals, but that short, because it was only 4.5 minutes, it was a good exercise in just for me, just learning how to build suspense. It's like the guy in it is my best friend. He would have built the sets on all of my films since, and
Oh, nice.
stuck him in front of the camera and just tried to see if you could build suspense with a guy seated, and what you do then with the camera and the silent
Hmm.
performance was very much in some ways like a remake of that. It was kind of remaking that little
Yeah.
short to in this, and it was the very first thing we shot for Oddity too.
Mhm.
That was like day one,
Wow.
um, when Gwillem arrived, and you never know. It's day one with actors, and you've hired them because they're talented, and
Hmm.
they seem nice to hang out with for a couple of weeks you're filming. But he was brilliant, and it's just there's no dialogue. He's completely alone, and
Hmm.
just what he did with it, I just loved it. I mean, he's just even at the ending
Yeah.
where he's sitting there, he just looks. I mean, Gwillem's just he's this lovely guy in reality. He's like the nicest guy
Uh-huh.
you can hang around with it. But then like he does this thing in the film and in the ending, he's so smug and he looks so happy with himself. He's gotten away with it.
Yes.
It really made me laugh filming it day one.
Yes.
Like on okay, this is going to be good working with him. And obviously
Yeah.
Shane Whiskers in who played our bellboy. I mean, he's in the film for seconds, but
Hmm.
it is nice to see him get to get a reaction and get a laugh when he does show up.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's multiple like I feel like there were like six different cuts of Ted looking around. So the whole time you're like, okay, there is gonna be a ghost. Oh, there's gonna be a ghost this time. Oh, there's gonna be a ghost. And you almost have like given up. You're like, oh, maybe it's not gonna happen. And then you finally get that scene where he is there. So it is another one of those like fun payoffs where you're kind of like drawn in and then you're like, okay, maybe I can relax now, and then it turns out you can't. So I loved it, and it does kind of, as someone who loves the revenge genre, I mean that's a subgenre. It's not really its own genre. It is helpful if you're wanting that final feeling of like, okay, she still got him in the end.
Yeah, and it's a funny one because I've seen a lot of there's been a lot of positivity for the film, obviously, and um, it's funny because that final shot, that last 10 seconds, whatever, or even just that last scene in general, that seems to have been the thing that people have mentioned a lot. They either really love it, or
Yeah,
I've seen a couple of things where it's like I hate that final shot. And you're going, really? I said, I find it quite funny. Whereas
I do too.
other people say, I love that last shot. That's just the best way to end them. It's the one where definitely people have an opinion on it. Somebody said to
Hmm.
me that you should have ended it as soon as he rang the bell, like ding,
Oh
comes winner,
yeah.
because now it's completely in the imagination of the audience. I do see the point. It was kind of boring. Like, would you go back and rewatch it? Then you'd like to get a glimpse of this
Yeah.
of this demonic bellboy standing there.
Mhm.
I don't know, but it's nice. It's nice to make something where people go, where you have where people have an opinion and they like to
Mhm.
talk about it a little bit.
Yeah.
Can't win them
Yeah,
all.
it's kind of like that was reminding me of spoiler alert, I guess, but it's been out long enough in Inception when like the
Yeah,
is that a dreidel or whatever the spinning thing is when it just wobbles for like half a second and then it cuts
yeah,
versus like still kind of getting the payoff after the bell because it's like also she's mentioned the bellboy. It's fun to actually get to see him
yeah,
too, but it also still doesn't go all the way to like show him dying either. So it still kind of
yeah,
has that feeling.
yeah. You never could have showed him like being, torn limb from limb by this demonic
Yeah,
bellboy. Like, oh, where do you end that
yeah,
film? But I think even originally the way it was storyboarded, and we shot it that way too, was that Gwillem was going to be done. Okay, this was all nonsense in terms of this ghost story with the bell. He was going to stand up, and as he stands up, the camera was going to rise with him, and our bellboy was going to be here, and he got into this kind of close-up shot. It wasn't
mm-hmm.
great. There was something about it, not in the performance or anything, but just something. It was like it's fine, and it'll make sense when we edit it in. But it was just then
Yeah,
we were between setups, and Gwillem was sitting down at the table,
mm-hmm.
and everybody's busy around the place, and he's getting ready, for the next shot. And we had Shane standing as the bellboy, but he had these contact lenses in, so he couldn't see anything. So he was just staying very still, just because the nature of his
Mm-hmm.
contact lenses wouldn't let him wander around. So just for safety, he was just standing there.
Yeah,
And the way they were standing is the way we had them shot, because I was at the other side of the room, and I was like going, "Oh, there's something really funny about that," because Gwillem just looks, he's quite a relaxed guy anyway, and he just seemed quite happy
yes,
sitting there. And then Shane looked quite odd standing there in this, trying to keep himself very, still and I guess
yeah,
calm because he had these things in his eyes. And I was like, "Oh, let's get
yeah,
that as well. Let's just, these things happen when you're filming. It's like, oh, let's grab a shot of that because that's quite
mm-hmm.
interesting." And then of course it became the end of the film. So uh,
Yeah.
you know, I guess these.
It's cool. Like sometimes that's how it comes together. Yeah.
Hmm,
Yeah. You just have to be open to it, I guess. Like
that's it.
since the visuals can just be so different, like
Yeah.
depending on, like you're saying, wide shot, close up, whatever,
Oh yeah.
can make such a difference. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I obviously loved it. In case everyone couldn't tell at this point. So I'm so happy I got to talk with you about it. Where can people follow you to stay up to date on everything?
I'm not great on social media at all. I have an Instagram account. I got to go back
Yeah.
and see if it's still there. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know why. I don't know. It's just
Yeah.
I'm not fully
That's
into it. But
okay.
I'm there. I'm on Instagram anyway.
Yes.
How's the movie going? And yeah,
Yep.
a few people have messaged me there, and I try to
Yeah.
respond. And yeah, that's probably the best. That's probably the best bet.
Yeah, it's what worked for me. That's how we got
I
connected
know.
on
There you go. Of
Instagram.
course.
So
Yeah.
yeah, so it definitely works.
Mhm.
I will link that in the show notes for everyone. And otherwise, thank you so much for talking with me about it.
Great. Yeah, it was lovely talking to you, Kate. Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, thanks for having me.